Great. Okay, so we're just going to kind of have a brief introduction to start. We're leaving plenty of room today for lots of time for our breakout group discussions. I think last listening session we didn't have quite enough time for those. So, and we've got large groups, so we're going to be allowing more time for that. We'll be reporting back for a quick 15-minute discussion before discussing next steps. So just to kind of give you a refresher on kind of what we've done so far as COMET, we started off grouping to discuss the scope and timeline of activity. That led to our kind of collaborative vision statement. We held listening sessions for product development in December, and you all engaged with the read ahead and within the listening sessions and commented afterwards, and then we documented those discussions to date. At the end of today's session, I'll kind of recap as to where we are in the process of the timeline of activity for COMET, but for now I will hand over to John.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so there's a lot of work that we've done, and we have a tight deadline timeline for us to complete the rest of it. We know that what we're headed towards is what we're calling a community call to action. So just a little bit more about what that is and what we're trying to get to. So the 3 listening sessions that we're doing and the work on the vision statement that we did and the kind of mind meld and discussions that we're having through these calls and asynchronously as well is really around trying to articulate a community vision, a community agreement on what we need for this type of thing to happen. So we can come together through these discussions, through the documents that we're creating, and define a scope for an initial iteration of something that could be created by community members, by the people here around the table, or others out there in the community that are interested. And what we want to do with this community call to action is just articulate that agreement, articulate what we've talked about here, what we know we see as important, what we don't know, what we see as challenges, these types of things articulated in a community call to action that asks the community for support and for resources to make it happen. So what we plan to have when we get to March is an outline of things from the listening sessions. So items from the product listening session and the discussion and the documentation that comes from that, outlines from the governance that we'll be discussing today, and some outlines of potential implementation approaches, really trying to make sure that we create a series of resources for the community to understand the work we've done, the discussions we've had, and what we see as needed out there in the community for creating collaborative approaches to metadata enrichment. And so what we need here, of course, is what we're getting. I mean, really great involvement and engagement from everybody here. You're doing a great job. Thank you. We really appreciate it. The conveners, which are Claire, myself, Maria, Adam, and Juan Pablo, we've all been very excited about the engagement from everybody. We know it takes time out of your day to put information in documents and come to these meetings, and we're really excited about the expertise and resources that we've received from all of you. So thank you. And what we want is just to capture that through statements, but also through questions. We want this to be something where we're creating a call to action around this topic that is nuanced and well-founded and leaves space for those who jump in with resources to create a solution with a little bit of room for them to be able to understand what the community wants, but also be able to move forward on their own with a mandate from us on what should be achieved. So a little bit more about what our task is today. So we have an understanding of where we're headed. Claire walked us through what we've done. I just mentioned the ultimate goal, but today's discussion is the subject area around governance. So governance means many different things to many different people. So one thing maybe we can try to avoid is trying to spend a lot of time on agreeing on a specific definition on what governance means. Let's just try to get into what we're talking about here. Let's get into the meat of the discussion. What we'd like to do is have a robust discussion in breakouts and through the read ahead, through the comments. Please continue to add comments to the read ahead documents during the call today and afterwards. The goal is really to talk through if there was a space where community enrichment of metadata for persistent identifiers is happening, how would we as a community expect the governance of that initiative to be done? So, what community interests do we have in that kind of a thing? What are some of the parameters that we would like to put around it? What are some of the pitfalls we want to make sure we are aware of? What are our concerns or ideas or interests? We don't expect there to be definitive answers. We saw that some troublemakers out there, like Cameron Nayland, said we should need anarchy. So that's fine. That's great. We should express all ideas. We don't expect that anything we say in these discussions will be the definitive answer. What we're trying to do, again, is to create an outline of ideas, consensus of opinions, exploration of varying opinions that allows for that community call to action to be nuanced. And so what we're going to do, again, as we did last time, is have breakouts. As Claire mentioned, we're going to spend a little bit more time in them. We felt like they were a little short last time. Each group is going to have a discussion about a different organizational form that was described in the read ahead. We're going to focus on that specific but organizational form in each discussion, but we also expect that there'll be questions that come up and discussions that come up. And so really try to help the person in your room that's doing notes with capturing your opinions. But if they are not in there, we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to capture them yourself. So please add notes to the documents, the note documents, the read aheads, if there's anything that you would like to be included. Next slide. Yep. So the three organizational types. So for those who did the homework and read the read ahead, this shouldn't be, this should all be a refresher. But the three high-level categories that we put in here just to help with the discussion. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's three discussion points for us to talk about. If the COMET scope of work became an initiative that the community was rallying behind, it could take various forms. It could take the form of a brand new organization, so a fully independent nonprofit that's got its own structure and staff and responsible for its own resource development and accountable to stakeholders and membership and potentially a membership model. It could also be on the number three, working within an existing organization. So establishing it as a service, offering it as to exist at an existing organization that's aligned with the goals. It could be an organization that dedicates to leveraging existing resources. So instead of creating new organization that requires new resources, it becomes part of an existing organization that leverages those resources, and that the responsibility into the community is aligned through kind of custom accountability measures. And something that's somewhere in between, a little bit different from both, but kind of aspects of both, is the idea of a joint project. So something that could be a collaboration between multiple organizations. In the for-profit world, there's a structure called joint ventures. So kind of modeled off of that kind of idea, but more in a community-focused approach. It could be something that's structured as an independent group where two organizations or three or more organizations are coming together, structuring it with an independent advisory group. Host organizations could provide some in-kind support for staff, but it could also pursue independent funding for additional projects. And so this is something that is a little bit of a hybrid model, and something that is a little more nuanced and maybe not as well understood by some of us. So if we have questions about this idea, we can tease them out. But these are the three models that we have that we want to discuss today. And the hope is here is not necessarily for us to write some, dissertation on organizational change. It's really about us to talk about what are some of the goods and bads and, promises and challenges in general, using the model that we have in our breakout room as an illustrative model for the future possibilities. Okay. Next slide. So we're about to go into breakout groups. The topics for each discussion are here, group 1, 2, and 3. We will, Claire will be putting us into those rooms shortly. So no need for you to really remember what group you're in. You'll just kind of be sorted into the rooms. But one thing, next slide, that we'd like to just go through is just high level structure and code of conduct. So it'll be 30 minutes. The conveners will take notes. Again, we really hope that you can help them with those notes. And if you're seeing that they're not really being captured, please just write them down, write some notes down yourself and add them to the read ahead document at the bottom or in other formats. Wherever you put them, we will find them. But it'd be great to capture all of your comments and thoughts. We'll return here and we'll do just a quick report out, nothing too crazy. We'll just kind of give some feedback back to the group and be able to have a quick discussion before we adjourn. And then next slide is just that the time is short, even though it's 30 minutes. We want to make sure, just from a code of conduct perspective, we don't have a formal code of conduct, but we just want everybody to respect each other's opinions. Please, when you see that there's a conversation happening, if you feel like you're speaking too much or you feel like your perspective has been heard, please make way for others. We want to make sure that, as I said before, we're not going too deep into implementation details. We could have 30 minutes, we could have 5 days on, the nuance of how an advisory board's governance bylaws, are affected by blah, blah, blah. Like, let's just kind of talk about this as a general discussion about the future. And while this is not a strictly confidential, anonymous initiative, we do want to make sure that everybody here is aware. We are running these groups with Chatham House rules. That means if there are remarks, it is important that we do not attribute those remarks to individuals. We want to make sure that comments and perspectives can be made without that kind of baggage associated with them. And so anything that we report back will be anonymized in our documentation, and we would expect that to be the same for each of you. And talking about these discussions afterwards, that we don't attribute any specific remarks to specific people, so that we have that freedom for free discussion. Okay. Anything else? Any questions? Any comments from other conveners? Any questions from the group? All right. So we're going to go into the meat of it. Claire.
So do we want to start a brief kind of share out? I don't know if John, you wanted to start from your group.
Sure. I asked people at the end of the call who wants to do the report out, and I asked people to raise their hand, and there was no hands raised. And then I called on one of the participants and said, "Would you do it?" And they said no. So, so yes, I am happy to. But it was a really good conversation. We were tasked with talking about setting up a new organization. And so we talked about that. We also talked about variations off of that, different ways that could be accomplished. One of the things that we talked through was the fact that a new organization would need to be a new entity, and that entity would need to have, determine what kind of context it should be created in. So determining the location, the governance structure, the government location, which region of the world, which country, what are the social and political implications of that, what are the potentially economic implications of that. It could either open us up for additional funding opportunities or close us out of funding opportunities, depending on where we go and what our structure is. So just considerations. But throughout all the discussion, people kept bringing up this idea of the initiative needs to remain nimble, right? So I think we ended on an important point, which was regardless of what we do, we need to remain small and nimble and be sharply focused. So even if we create our own organization, it needs to be we need to be reminded, and that needs to be a part of its formation. Um, Also, there's definitely a level of membership fatigue that exists in our communities. And so, if we were to do something with a new organization, fighting against that tension is going to be something that we have to grapple with. And we also just talked a little bit about how there are different configurations that can happen with new organizations. You can be your own organization, but partner with a university or another group to create stability or a relationship that creates situations. So we talked through some other organizations we know that way that work that way, and just thought that while this is a we know that we were in a discussion that was supposed to be tightly focused on one of the models. We were starting to also saying that there is potentially variations off of this model that are interesting and could be compelling. Any other comments from the group? Right. That was team one or group one.
So Adam, I think you had group two.
I did. Very active discussion. A lot of focus on Roar, but we'll circle back to that. So we started out talking a little bit about organizational culture. So in the context of having a joint project, how does how does this joint project find unity, and how does the culture of its parent organizations influence kind of how resources are contributed and how those resources see the work? We kind of thought a lot about resourcing in general. So there was in the product read ahead, we said that we suggested that an opportunity that it would lower kind of initial overhead costs, establish feasibility, and reduce additional risk. But someone raised the point that actually getting this kind of stable constellation of resources could actually be more challenging than other forms of organization. When we got into the discussion of Roar, this was actually proven out to be a little bit true, in that there was kind of a tipping point where Roar got stable resources and was able to establish itself as a successful organization, but that was kind of through multiple cycles of iteration. There was kind of a broader conversation as well about how COMET is positioned as being either complementary versus enhancing the work of a host organization. So again, contrasting with Roar, the mission of Roar is kind of complementary to its host organization CDL cross-ref and data site, in that it's a new persistent identifier that enriches their metadata. But in this case, there was a suggestion that COMET might be doing work that these organizations want to do. So how do you resolve that tension? There was kind of a suggestion about whether or not a joint project allows for broader scope, and also whether the benefits of a joint project model are that each kind of organization acts as a natural kind of check or balance on the kind of overall operation, and represent a microcosm of the community that it's trying to serve. I'm going to circle back to talk a bit about Roar. So the obvious example for a joint project is Roar. For those who don't know, Roar is managed as a joint project between its three parent organizations, CDL, Crossref, and DataSite. There was some discussion in retrospective, was a joint project the best? That's hindsight 2020. I think it's been successful, but there was a lot of kind of questioning about how it works from an operational perspective, both historically and in the present. So we talked about how the initial approach was iterative, in that we kind of proceeded cautiously with resourcing using data and benchmarks to establish what was actually necessary versus an abstract ambition. And that we also spent a lot of time thinking about alternate scenarios for resourcing. So while it was operated as a joint project, in terms of its long-term viability, there's consideration of whether or not it should eventually become its own organization, whether or not it should do things like have premium subscriptions, and how those tensions were kind of resolved over time. From an operational perspective, there was interest in how it's actually structured and organized. So we talked about how there are commitments to resourcing that are enforced through a kind of memorandum of understanding, as well as more informal structures and kind of ongoing conversations and discussions with the parent organization and other groups that kind of inform ROAR's work. The other thing that was important in terms of ROAR success as a joint project was making sure that we had equal commitment from all partners. A risk that was identified is that a joint venture, things can become unbalanced if a partner feels like or if other members of the joint project feel like they can't, an individual partner isn't contributing resources at the same level, or there's something that gets them kind of out of alignment. It was also flagged that when we think about resources, there's like kind of multiple dimensions to that, and that has been evident in the operation of ROAR as a joint project. So there's infrastructure resources, like all of the kind of technical infrastructure. There's financial kind of things that have to be done in order to manage a joint project. There's administrative resources, and then there's how we pursue things like grant funding. Going through my notes. There was a great comment about the navigation of complex stakeholder relationships required with a joint project. Someone pointed out that this is actually something that we always are doing in the PID world, is kind of inherent to the work that we're doing, both in terms of having to encourage adoption of these services, to get kind of buy-in, and also just work with each other to complement each other's work. So I like that someone just immediately kind of highlighted that strength. There was also some interest in what organizational form can best support outside contributions, maybe not from a governance perspective, but what allows for other organizations who might not be able to contribute staff or financial resources, but might be able to contribute various forms of metadata, various forms of kind of review of projects and work. Yeah, okay, so I think I covered anything. Does anyone else want to chip in, throw anything? No.
Okay. Thank you. So let's move to Maria and Juan Pablo, the group 3.
All right. So we were looking at working within an existing organization. And it sort of, the conversation really started with, it depends on the organization. So it depends on how big they are. It also depends on what type of kind of partnership there is between COMET and the existing org. So we talked about the difference between if it was a fiscal sponsor versus, a permanent home, maybe a temporary arrangement where they're really, providing the structure to get it running with the assumption that eventually it will become its own organization. So some interesting different models when you talk about working within an existing org. You could be permanently housed there, could just be, fiscal, HR, kind of administrative assistance, or a temporary arrangement. So that was kind of an interesting breakdown of exactly what type of, partnership with an existing org is. So some of the benefits we talked about, I think obviously one of them is sustainability for the project. Another one being trust. If partnering with the right organization who already has established community trust could make things move faster, there would be less sort of beginning piece of making a network and really gaining trust in the community. So there, if you're working with the right organization, you kind of can move. You can start from a further point in terms of that. On the flip side, it could also come with baggage. So depending on who you're working with. Another sort of potential challenge with working within an existing org is that org may have would have more of a leadership role. Therefore, some of the sort of more community-based aspects of this work would lessen or could lessen with this type of model. Existing orgs sometimes could be less flexible, and again, getting more say kind of than we currently are working. And I see we are almost out of time, so I'm going to cut it there unless Juan Pablo or anybody else thinks of something I missed. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think you're good.
Thanks.
Let's see what for next steps.
Yeah, I'm just going to run over really briefly what's going to happen next. So if you have any additional comments that you weren't able to make or that have occurred to you afresh since this discussion, please do add those to the read ahead document. I will send an email later today kind of with a deadline on that so that we can make sure that everything's in there before we start writing up what the feedback from the session has been. Thank you. And we will be also sending out a sign up for the next session on implementation parameters, which will be going ahead in February, while we also prepare for that, for creating that community call to action in March. At which point there'll be a bunch of outreach activities to the community, leveraging kind of encapsulating everything that we've discussed and outlining the community call to action at that point. So we've kind of got another month of discussion, and then we're going to move into kind of that community share out phase. So immediate actions are to add any additional comments and then look out for that sign up email about the February session. And that's everything, I think. So thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Last time we had too short of a breakout, and it's this time too short of discussions afterwards. But hopefully, with the next listening session, we'll get it just right.